So today we're going to talk about best practices for remote onboarding. So my name is Paul Lopushinsky, and as Becca said, with Playficient. And she got the pronunciation right. In case you're more curious, here's a nice little visual representation about it. As well, while I'm talking, feel free to type anything in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. Whether questions, ideally keep till the end, but if you have any kind of comments as well, I do have the chat open, so I will be keeping an eye on that. So Becca, if you want to open the next poll. So prior to when COVID kicked in, what was your organization like in regards to remote work? Did you have, was it 100% in office? Was it a hybrid model? Was it 100% remote? Actually, I think I might be able to open the poll on my end. All right, here we go. All right, the poll should be open now. There we go. Yeah, the poll's working now, Rebecca. Rebecca, sorry. So right now, looking at the responses, 38% were 100% in the office, about 45% were hybrid model, 100% remote. There's about 14% not sure. Was did I send the wrong poll? Oh, it sent that's okay. So there's a different one. That's okay. So this is what it was prior to COVID. I think it was sending one that was afterwards, but we'll talk about that later in the chat. So it looks like we had, mostly still 100% in the office, but moving forward, it'll be kind of a hybrid model. So I want to start with the quote, especially what's happened over the last year, from Frankenstein by the author Mary Shelley, that nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change. And we've seen that in the last year. It's, if you're using a story time analogy, we've been impacted by a major plot twist. Some organizations more than others. Some businesses have unfortunately shut down. Some got caught flat-footed. Some was business as usual. Companies like we're using now, webinars, Zooms, of course, business has been booming. But organizations have had the chance to reevaluate everything from the top down, keeping a pulse on workers. Well-being became much more to the forefront. There's the matrix I'm sure we're all familiar with on the right-hand side here, about things that were, we have the urgency and not urgent. We have important, not important. And we saw a lot of shifts in the last year. Things that didn't seem so urgent became urgent, or things that were urgent became not so urgent. And now that things slowly seem to be maybe returning more to a baseline, and that's up to see with the vaccinations and everything. What's next? But most importantly, over this last year, what lessons did we learn? Because we've had so much happen over the last year, so many new experiences for people, for organizations. So there's another quote I have here from William Shakespeare, from Richard III, that why grow the branches when the root is gone? I think this last year, when we go back and talk about that urgent, not urgent, important, not important, there's been a lot of that in the last year where a lot of organizations have really had to go back to the root foundation of everything they do, including what we're going to talk about here today with onboarding. So this is more one of the things you would see before when it came to onboarding, where, when you ever thought about onboarding, especially in the office, one of those big things that doesn't happen anymore is, the office, the person comes in, their desk is all nice and laid out. They have what I call the share-worthy aspects of onboarding. When you don't have that office anymore, whether you had just like a more basic office, or you had something along the lines of, what I like to call the kindergarten office, the cliche Silicon Valley style office. Organizations, like, you've had to get more creative over the last year of really what you want to do in regards to employee engagement, but also with onboarding. Is anyone else having any audio issues? I see, Amy, you've mentioned that a couple times, but okay. So over the last year, excuse me, with that, where I talked about with the Shakespeare's quote about, going back to the core, I think that what's been really good is a lot of organizations have really gone back to the fundamentals. And what we're discussing here with these best practices about onboarding is still really going back to those fundamentals. Doesn't really matter what kind of organization you are, what size it is. There are commonalities when it comes to onboarding that are still going to be consistent. And I have a list here of 5. And of course, this could vary for organization to organization, but I feel it's a fairly good list of, from day one, when people first, I guess now with remote, people are logging into Slack, new employees know that they made the right choice in joining. They might, have had several other offers, but they decide to go with your organization. You want to show from day one they made the right choice. You don't want it being 11 a.m. in the morning and they're thinking to themselves, did I make the right choice in joining this organization? Because it happens. I've been there. I'm sure we've all been there in some instances. Giving employees everything they need to know, but we're afraid to ask. It's always that awkward stage of being that new individual being brought into an organization and trying to figure out the ropes, but also not feeling like you're bugging everyone to get all this information. A lot of organizations, unfortunately, you kind of have to jump around to find all this information instead of having it laid out before you. Easing them into the organization. I've been in various organizations, I'm sure you have as well, where basically it's getting like tossed into the ocean with no life jacket. Instead of that, you really want to focus on dipping their toes first in the pool before they submerge themselves. And really showing them how your organization works, whether that's through the values, the history of the organization. You really want to focus on those key fundamentals and showing them that their work matters. You show them that they're part of the team, that they're going to be valued, that this will change as a result of things being more remote, but the fundamentals still remain the same. So I want to briefly talk about 4 best practices when it comes to employee onboarding. There's the buddy system, the entry interview, the 30, 60, 90-day plan, and the stay interview. So the buddy system is when the new employees are matched with someone to show them the ropes, talk to them about the culture, and the unwritten rules that exist at the organization. And I'm curious in the chat if people do have a buddy system in their current organization. You could just say yes or no. Yes, perfect. Mostly yeses, a couple no's there, not formally, okay. Perfect. With the Donut Slack app. Okay, yep, that's perfect as well. So just for some brief benefits, when Microsoft did a pilot program with, when it came to new buddies, that 56% new hires who met their onboarding buddy at least once in the first 90 days found that it greatly brought them up to speed with being productive in their role. And that number jumped to nearly 100% when they met more than 8 times in the first 90 days. Excuse me. Now, one thing I've seen a few no's here and there is, do you want current employees as buddies to be voluntary or mandatory? I'm also curious in the chat for those who also have said yes. For you, is it voluntary or is it mandatory? Because I've seen that with an organization I'll cover here briefly, is what if you're struggling to get current employees to be buddies? Like voluntary, perfect. And how many buddies should new employees have? So of course, who should be a new buddy is anyone who's an experienced member of the team who has been at the organization for a long period of time, or someone who's and another one as well is someone who's started fairly recently, knows the ups and downs about being a new person. I know some organizations, they're more focused on people with experience, but if someone recently joined the organization the last year, they might have a lot of really good insights. I'm not saying bring in the person to be new buddy who's been there for like a month, but someone who's been there a little bit longer. so that they've recently gone through the onboarding experience, because they've went through it as well. At least 1 year. Perfect. One thing I always tell organizations as well is make sure to make use of multiple buddies. The social media company Buffer has 3 buddies for new employees, that being a leader buddy, a role buddy, and a culture buddy. So someone who's more experienced with the team, someone on the team who understands the role, and someone who gives great praise and feedback around the culture fit. And a few of them here, I see you have some mandatories and some voluntaries. Here's some things I found when it comes to getting current employees to be buddies. I'm also curious in the chat for those who make it voluntary what they do, because I picked this up from other people that some sell it as recognition for embodying culture, some make an incentive with additional vacation days, some it's a leadership and development opportunity, some it comes up during performance reviews and thanking buddies at town halls. Some people where it's more mandatory, they can't get to like a vice president level unless they will be new buddies, like it's expected of them. So moving on from the buddy system. Now the entry interview, I know it has a few different names. That could be something along the lines of the get to know them individual. I know that's always a common chat. So I am curious in the chat there if people do make use of the entry interview, because I find this one could be typically more of a 50-50 split. So what the entry interview is you conduct shortly after new employees start to gain a better understanding of their interests, their values, preference, skills, and career aspirations. And this is different than the job interview itself. I mean, some of the questions will have a lot of overlap, but as well, there's going to be difference now that they're in the role itself, that they're going to be answering differently. So I'm seeing a 1 week, 1 month, 3 months in. Perfect. I love that. Mostly no so far when I see that. So, and then people always ask me, it's like, well, Paul, what should I ask during the entry interview? It's like, well, go in with some questions in mind, but always be sure to keep things flexible. You don't want to have a list of 5 questions. You don't need to nail them all. You want to keep them open-ended. So for example, some questions I love to suggest is, what would you like to see from your manager? What kind of potential barriers are going to get in your way? How can we help remove them? And why I also recommend going in with just a basic list of questions as opposed to, making sure you have to hit everything is, don't just take that answer that they give at face value. So for example, if you ask, what kind of barriers could potentially be in the way, they'll give you an answer. And from that, instead of just taking it at face value, you want to dig in deeper. Are managers the people conducting these interviews? Typically that's going to be the case. It might really depend at your organization, the size of it. So from their response, ask a why about their response and keep digging. Sometimes you need to ask 5 whys to get to that root cause of what they're really looking for. Sometimes it might be more. So another thing that we can make use of in regards to onboarding best practices is the 30, 60, 90-day plan. So of course, what that is an action plan to show new employees that was expected of them, what to prioritize in their new job in the first 90 days. So to quote John Locke, not the French philosopher, I believe he was a French philosopher, the character from Lost, that a leader can't lead until he knows where he's going. So breaking these periods down to the 30, 60, 90-day period. The first 30 days is all about learning. This is the most hands-on and intensive. To use an analogy, if you're a parent or when you were a child yourself, this is when you're learning learning how to bike, and your parents are right there holding the handlebars with you and guiding your way forward. So this portion of the 90-day plan will have the most overlaps for new hires, regardless of role, department, or seniority. So this is keeping track of the values. Everyone gets understanding of that, understanding the fundamentals of the organization. Then we jump more into the 30, 60-day range. This is, again, with the bike analogy, this is when you're more hands-off, and this is when the training wheels are still on. So you're still, you have them in sight. and they still have those training wheels, but they're a little more independent. This is where they get more involved in projects, start to speak up more with their ideas and thoughts. And this is where, when you look at your 30, 60, 90-day plan, this is where it starts to diverge depending on the role they're coming in at, the department, the seniority. So Laura, you say we do 30, 60, 90, 80 one-year check-ins with each employee, and they're conducted through Culture Amp. Perfect. So once we hit that 60 to 90-day range, this is when the training wheels are now off. This is where they become much more independent of what they're doing. This is where, you know, people are really going to them and they're really being integrated into the team, and their skill set and their expertise is really coming to the forefront. And what I love about the entry interviews is at that period in time, it's a great way to get insight into what should be more into the 60 to 90-day period to help them become more independent. Here's some things that you could do, and here's some aspects that you picked up from your discussion, their pain points, their challenges, what they want to do in that entry interview that you can integrate into that 60 to 90-day range. As I use the bicycle analogy, another analogy I love to give with onboarding, not just onboarding, but also specifically the 30, 60, 90-day plan, is what I call the food menu analogy. So, you know, the first 30 days, that's the main course. So everyone's going to receive that portion. It's going to pretty much look the same of, here's everything about our organizations, here are the values. And once you get further in, that's where you can call these side dishes. So depending on the department, seniority, and individual level, that's going to be offered for that portion. So someone in software development isn't going to need everything that someone in marketing is going to need. We recommend the entry interview at the end of the first week and check in with how's it going. Perfect. So really, there should be a GIF here, but that's okay. Someone throwing a letter into the ocean. So my main goal when it comes to this with the 30, 60, 90 plan is to help get new employees to dip their foot into the pool and slowly submerge themselves and throwing them to the ocean with no life jacket. So there you go. You have 3 analogies when it comes with onboarding or the 30, 60, 90-day plan. It's thinking of it like throwing them into the ocean as opposed to dipping their foot in the pool. You have the bicycle analogy, and you also have the food menu analogy. So because you've had so much change over the last year, I want to make sure that incrementally you're always improving this onboarding experience. And you could call it the stay interview. You could call it the checkup interview. There's many other terms for it, but really with the stay interview, this is something more once you get past that 90-day period that really can help determine what's been working well so far and what needs improvement. So at this point, employees have been at the company for a while. They have a better understanding of what's going around. They've gone through the onboarding experience. They might be a little more comfortable with sharing information that might seem a little, they could be a little more critical about what's been going on. So if you really want to focus on improving that onboarding experience during these stay interviews, you ask questions like, if you could do the first 90 days again, what would you have be done differently? What kind of barriers have popped up for you since starting? And again, as I mentioned earlier, there was the 5 whys. This is again, a technique you really want to use here if they give you something about, I wish I had more buddy support, then you can ask, why did you want more buddy support? And they'll give you an answer to that. And you can really break in further of what's been going on. Another, coincidentally, that also is based around 5, organizations always ask me, it's like, well, Paul, how many people do I need to ask to figure out what's going well with their onboarding? So there's a great rule known as the rule of 5 for testing. So just briefly in the chat, I'm curious that over the last year, approximately how many employees have you hired? Two, 15, 0, 5, 8, 30, 50, 50 plus, or 50 new company. Okay. 10 in our department. Okay, perfect. So this will be, from looking at these numbers here, this should be fairly easy to do where going to those new individuals who've joined, some of you have said 5, 7, 6, just going to 5 people and finding out using something like these techniques, that's more than enough to get feedback to patterns are going to start emerging. People are going to say, oh, this is what's working. This isn't what's working with our onboarding process. And from there, you could take that feedback and integrate it into the next onboarding process for people who come in. If no patterns are emerging, then you could start going get feedback from more people. Try adding a few more in. So a lot of these numbers I'm seeing here, they're fairly small, so it should be fairly easy. I see, Jennifer, you have 50 plus. It might be a lot more difficult, but that's the great thing about the rule of 5 is typically you're going to hit those numbers and get that feedback. Typically when I come from like a user experience design background, that's usually all it really takes is to identify these patterns that start emerging. So one thing that happened very early on is there's something called the FANG effect. So FANG is an investment acronym term. So that's like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, the big tech companies. You could throw in companies like Twitter, Microsoft into the mix as well. That a lot of organizations look to what these organizations do, the FANG organizations, for inspiration. So what does the future of remote work look like at these organizations? After all, before government regulations really kicked in, the big FANG organizations were pretty progressive and forefront when it came to getting people remote. So looking over the last few weeks, there's been a lot of indication that pretty much all of them are going back to the office. Apple can't wait to be back into that office. I know the CEO of Netflix really hates remote work. Amazon pretty much looks to bring everyone back into their office. Google, I think if they can have up to like 14 days remote per year, and it's going to have to be like a very formal process to do. So there's been a major shift in companies getting pulled back. So I know I did the wrong poll earlier and the other one disappeared. But if you want to type in the chat now, what are your organization's plans in regards to remote work post-pandemic? Is it going to be 100% in the office? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be 100% remote? No, or you're not sure. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of hybrids. Seeing a couple remotes. Was remote, hybrid. Okay, perfect. So that's great to hear. So I want to make sure you guys, because these tech organizations are moving more back to the office, it doesn't mean you need to. It's just something that I see so common is people will look at these big tech organizations and be like, no, we got to do the same thing. So do what makes the most sense for your organization. So far I see pretty much all hybrids and remotes. I don't think I saw any in the office. But that might change. Maybe your boss or your boss's boss may want to pull people back. And I want you to consider, do what makes most sense for your organization. And because when you look at lessons learned, I mean, we've learned many lessons throughout the last year with, some organizations were gone kicking and screaming, some it was business as usual. That if you look throughout human history, it's easy for us to forget these kind of lessons if we don't really reflect and remind ourselves. So anything that happened with employee engagement, anything that happened with employee onboarding, it can be really easy to get, caught up more in the details or again, using that quote from Shakespeare, the branches as opposed to focusing on the root. So just before we move again forward to the panel itself, I want to remind you again that nothing is so painful to the human mind as a great and sudden change.